project titled Human Rights and Robots' Roles, Ethics of Autonomous Farming. And by this I mean the ethics of delegating decisions about when and whom to harm to algorithms in certain contexts. So, what's the problem? Autonomous weapon systems and autonomous vehicles will have the independent capacity to harm and kill humans. And the general problem that my project addresses is that it's unclear what it would mean for these autonomous systems to operate justly in our rights-based moral and legal framework. So in philosophy, we standardly determine whether it's permissible to harm based on concepts like individual rights, corresponding duties, and broader questions of who owes what to whom. And there is considerable uncertainty as to whether the morality of autonomized harming is governed by the same moral principles that determine the permissibility of harming for humans, or whether we need a set of altogether new principles to decide this. So, what's my project doing about this? 3 things in 3 self-standing parts. The first challenges the widespread assumption that autonomous weapon systems must comply with international humanitarian law. I think this is problematic because IHL essentially legally permits people to kill in situations in war in which it might be morally impermissible to do so. And this divergence between the morality and the law makes sense in the case of human agents, but I think it doesn't in the case of autonomous weapon systems. So I defend an alternative set of principles that's more closely aligned with international human rights law. The second part concerns autonomous vehicles and the question of whether their crash avoidance software should be able to prioritize the safety of their own passengers over that of other people in traffic. I argue that governments have a duty to impartially minimize harms overall, although individuals have a right to not act as a means of the promotion of the greater good or the welfare of others. So what this means essentially is that governments have a duty to prohibit people from doing things that individuals would be allowed to do themselves. So I consider a number of principles that might help solve this problem that are familiar from debates in political philosophy to do with the ethics of risk imposition and political application. And the third part concerns the question of compensation and rectificatory justice. So questions of who owes what to whom if a person has been harmed by an autonomous system. I essentially argue that a lack of rectificatory measures ex post might pose a serious problem to the ex ante permissibility of the use of autonomous systems. So, for example, if it's foreseeable that compensation for a harm post is going to be impossible, then this in itself provides a strong reason against the use of that system. Why should all this matter? First, the project aims to contribute something new to the theoretical literature by defending a specific view of what it would mean for autonomous systems to operate justly. And in doing this, I identify certain limits and lacks of the philosophical tools that we have available, and where we need to still make conceptual clarifications and potentially think about new approaches to these problems. And second, the project has implications for what concretely could be done at the policy level to enforce relevant moral principles. So what needs to happen in practice if human rights are to be protected? What duties do individuals and institutions, so governments and private companies, have with regard to the development, employment and regulation of autonomous systems, both in domestic, everyday life, like traffic, and in international armed conflict. And so more generally, the project helps to clarify what's at issue in the first place, which I think is often unhelpfully vague in hyped up popular debates. So to conclude, I'd be keen to hear all kinds of feedback. In particular, I'm really interested to hear specifically how you think philosophers can be of use, where concepts need to be clarified, where relevant moral principles need to be identified, where we can help clarify things. More specifically, if there's anyone working on international human rights law and international humanitarian law, I'd be really interested to hear what you think about the relationship between the two. I know there's been a lot of debate about that recently in legal circles, I'm presenting the first draft of that paper at a conference in Switzerland next week. So if you have any comments, now's the time to tell me. And then lastly, if there's anything particular in terms of literature or cases that I should be aware of, do let me know as well. But as I said, any kind of feedback is very welcome. Thank you very much.